Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you as you gather together in your groups. I just want to say a couple words about the text for this week. We had a lot of really great discussion all through this temptation narrative as a preaching team, and I want to share some of those things with you because I think they're really helpful. We have in this depiction of Christ in the wilderness his own resistance to the devil's temptation. And Scripture as a whole calls us to be conformed to the image of Christ. And so when we see him here overcoming the devil, there's certainly profit to be had in observing what he does and how he resists and overcomes Satan. But one of the most important things we can ask ourselves when we're examining a text and studying it and trying to really understand what the Lord is trying to say is, first and foremost, what did the original author mean? What did Matthew mean to communicate? We deal with this in secular life, don't we, with with questions about the Constitution of the United States. Does it mean what we want it to mean now? Or is the important question, what did the authors intend to say with regard to how they structured our country? The original intent is what matters. And it's the same thing with Scripture. And so what I want us to clue in on here is that Matthew gives us a signpost of what his intention is in the text this morning, in verses 8 through 11 of this whole temptation narrative. You see, in verse 11, Matthew says, "Behold." This should stand out to us as we look at the whole temptation narrative, verses 1 through 11 of chapter 4, because it's the only command. It's the only imperative. It's the only time Matthew says, hey, this is something I want you to do. So he's drawing our attention to the fact that angels came to minister to Jesus. And the significance of that, if you remember Josh's sermon from last week, and I touch on it in this week's sermon as well, is that the devil had been tempting Jesus to test his Father on the basis of Psalm 91, which had said that for the one who takes refuge in God, God would command his angels concerning them, and on their hands they would bear you up so that you don't strike your foot against a stone. That command of God concerning the angels was a mark and a stamp of God's approval, of a person's truly taking refuge in him and being under his protection. And so here in verse 11, Matthew tells us, behold, angels came. Jesus resisted the temptation to test whether angels would come, whether God would protect him if he chucked himself off the temple. And now that the temptation is over, here they are. So Matthew is giving us a really important insight into his own intent and meaning in the way that he's speaking to us. That after this narrative, behold, look at this, and we can understand the significance why. He wants us to see, first and foremost in this text, not ourselves, not how we ourselves can resist temptation, though we certainly can see something of that in the way that Jesus acts. But Matthew wants us to see that Jesus has been approved by God, that he has commanded his angels concerning Christ, that Jesus has met this test of obedience in the wilderness that we've been talking about for 3 weeks now. And so as you study this text in your groups, although you might observe some things about how Jesus behaves and how he resists the devil that certainly can be helpful for you, make sure that you keep your eye on the ball. And know that when it comes to asking the question, what is God trying to say to me in this text? First and foremost, the question is, what does the text mean? That's what God's trying to say to you, first and foremost. And so I hope as you study this text together, you will merely see and be drawn to the obedience of Christ. Because that's what this is about. All this temptation narrative, that Jesus is in the wilderness, resisting the devil in behalf of his people, living a life that we could not, overcoming temptation that we fall into as our representative in our place. So that one day when we believe in him, that obedience and that righteousness can be credited to us through the mercy and grace of God. That's the point of the text. And I hope that as you study this in your groups and as you pray, that God will bring you to a greater knowledge and a more zealous love of the obedience of Christ and the righteousness that he has procured for you. Because it is the only means to be made right with God. It is everything for us. So don't miss it. God bless you.